So according to a review, this film will make your chest hair grow chest hair. Yes, we're talking about masculinity. Hello everyone, I'm Sarah from Everyday Starlet. Welcome to my channel. I make videos to inspire you to be the star of your own life. I'm continuing my masculine feminine energies film breakdown series with the film 300. If you're not familiar with what I mean by masculine and feminine energies, I talk about this in most of my videos, but a brief summary: masculine and feminine energies are energies that live within all of us. We all contain both energies, but we all have a core energy that's the energy we are most ourselves in. We can be in wounded or healed versions of either of these energies, and in order to have sexual polarity in a relationship, you need there to be a masculine partner and a feminine partner. These opposite energies attract and the same energies repel sexually. Within each of these energies, masculine and feminine, there are different archetypes within those energies, and we have the ability to embody all of these archetypes, but usually we're more comfortable in certain archetypes above others. So let's get into the film 300. This is actually a kind of a different film for me to break down, but I actually figured I've been doing a lot of films that have very divine feminine energy to them, and I wanted to do one that was more focused on masculinity. I actually watched this film for the first time to do this breakdown, mainly because I saw a clip from this film that was kind of circulating online that people were using as an example of relationship dynamics, similar to what I do here and what I do on my social media. And I really enjoyed the clip, so I thought, why don't I watch the whole film? I don't normally watch films like this, and I actually think this is a good time to talk a little bit about masculine entertainment and feminine entertainment. We think of like guy movies or chick flicks and stuff, but there is actually a reason why we tend to be more drawn to one type of film above the other. And again, we all contain both energies, so when I talk about masculine and feminine, if you enjoy the masculine films, it's appealing to the masculine side in you, regardless of your gender. And if you're more attracted to movies that appeal to the feminine, it's because it's actually more attractive to your own feminine energy, regardless of your gender. So this isn't to say that you have to only enjoy one type of film or not the other, but you will likely be more drawn to a certain type of film based on your own natural core energy. So for example, a masculine film is going to be one that's going to usually involve some kind of physical battle or sports. Sports really is kind of like simulated war, so to speak. Or, you know, masculine films that have battle scenes or some kind of like men being put to the physical test, because men have this drive to like physically compete. A more feminine film is going to be one where the battle and the drama is going to be more emotional. It's going to be more of like an internal emotional battle, because the feminine lives in emotions. But again, you can enjoy both of these films. I would say that 300 is definitely a masculine film. However, I enjoyed watching it. And not just for the masculine men, but I enjoyed watching it. But to be honest, I enjoyed watching it more for the relationship dynamics and the emotions than I actually did for the battle scenes. Battle scenes in films don't really do all that much for me. And to be honest, this film wasn't too bad, but if films have too much blood and gore, for me personally, like, I just can't do it. If you're like me, this film was borderline, but not too bad. But because it was based in a comic book, I believe, it has like an ancient old world feel to it, with also a new modern sci-fi feel to it. You know, I enjoyed, but you know, that's not necessarily going to be for everybody. So one of the reasons I was drawn to this film was because I knew it was a very masculine film, and I wanted to do something that represented more masculine energy, because I do talk a lot about feminine energy here on my channel. But I was actually really impressed with the way that this film represents both king energy, like the archetype of masculine energy that is the king energy, and also of queen energy in the queen, really. And so I really loved their dynamic, even though they're not actually together for much of the film. Yeah, I'm really glad that I watched this film for this breakdown, because I think this is going to be a really good one. I will make a note that YouTube has been really weird about whether or not they let me include clips here in this video, which is weird because I get all my clips from people who post them on YouTube, and for some reason sometimes YouTube just won't let me include clips in the video. It just blocks the whole video. The last few videos they actually haven't let me include any film clips, so I don't know if I'll be able to include film clips in this video. So if you watch this video, you can take some notes and then watch this film and see if you can notice some of the things that I pointed out. And I'll also be including some film clips and like mini breakdowns on my TikTok. I'll link that in the description box below, so you can check those out if you want to see like just little mini examples of some of the things that I'm talking about in this video. So this film takes place primarily in ancient Sparta, and it's interesting how in the very beginning they explain how they grow strong Spartan men, and they explain the initiation process that young Spartan boys go through in order to become great Spartan men. It's pretty drastic, I will admit, but actually most cultures in history, most successful cultures, have had an initiation process to initiate boys into manhood. It's a very common belief that boys will stay boys until they are initiated into manhood, ideally by strong masculine leaders, which is one of the reasons why I believe we have so many man children right now in our society, is because we have a massive lack of strong, healthy masculine leaders. And we don't have a really solid initiation process for initiating boys into men. And I really do believe that's actually at the root of most of the problems that we're having in our society right now. Lack of strong masculine leaders that are leading men into manhood, and also representing what healthy masculine energy is for young girls so they know what to look for. And it's not to say that women don't have initiation processes, but in general, the feminine, women in general, are thought to be very connected with nature, Mother Nature, and the cycles of the moon. And many people believe that nature initiates women into womanhood on its own. I mean, you know, women's bodies change more drastically than men. They start going through their menstrual cycles and things like that. Nature really does start initiating women into womanhood, whereas men, because they're not as connected to nature as women are, they need masculine leaders to initiate them. That's actually been a belief in a lot of cultures, and there's actually the great book King, Warrior, Magician, Lover that talks about the masculine archetypes. I mentioned this in my masculine archetypes video, where they go into a lot more detail about the rituals, and I've read some stuff about this, and it's actually really fascinating. And I think the fact that they detail so well how young boys get initiated into masculinity, obviously this is very drastic. Men are literally trained just to be strong Spartan men to go to war. That's their culture. It's not necessarily that every culture needs to be training boys to do that specifically. It's just having an initiation process. And it's interesting, they do show a mother having her son being taken away to go through this initiation process and how emotional she is. And I think that that's part of it, is that typically young boys were sort of taken from their mothers in order to go through this process, and were really like raised by men. And that's not to say that, you know, we don't need mothers, we don't need, it's just that after a certain age, I think we start to see mothers still coddling their boys, which is natural. It's very natural for a woman to want to coddle a young boy and treat him like like her little boy, because to mothers, you know, no matter what age a man is, he's always going to be her little boy. But actually, you know, him not constantly being exposed to that mothering energy after a certain age is going to help him grow more into manhood. And I think that's something actually to be mindful of in our culture, is that as mothers, it's natural to want to mother your children for as long as possible. However, especially with young boys, having a mother who is always mothering them past a certain age doesn't necessarily allow him to step fully into the man that he has the potential to be. So this film primarily focuses on King Leonidas. I might butcher the names in this film, I'm not gonna lie. He's played by Gerard Butler, and he's the king of Sparta. And the king is married to Queen Gorgo, I believe is how you say her name, and they have a son together. Now, a messenger comes from Persia and basically wants to send a message to Sparta to ask them to surrender. And in Sparta, they don't surrender, which is actually a very common trait of the masculine. Surrendering, literally surrendering to life, being in full surrender, is very feminine energy. Surrendering to the masculine. Surrendering is very feminine energy, and it can be a very positive thing. The masculine doesn't typically like to surrender. The masculine tends to like to control, to structure things. So King Leonidas basically is like, not happening. He wants to go to war. In reality, masculine energy really does like a battle. So Leonidas, even though he is king, he has to answer to kind of like group of elders that are these mythical beings that live up in a mountain. And he also has to listen to his political council. And typically the political council is going to side with these elders. So even as king, he doesn't have the full reign to do whatever he wants. When he visits these mythical elders, you find out that they have what they call oracles, which I think is actually really symbolic of the feminine masculine dynamic. Many people believe that feminine energy or feminine beings are oracles. David Data refers to this a lot in his work. If you're familiar with that, he talks about the woman, the feminine, being the oracle. It's because the feminine in history has been known to have a more direct connection to the divine. If you think about it, new life actually births through the feminine, and so women are seen as having this sort of very spiritual connection. It's actually only in modern times that we've kind of dismissed that. In ancient times, women were thought to be able to connect with a higher power, to connect with, I mean, women's intuition was actually seen as something that people really listened to. It wasn't just fluffed off like we often do today as just being a woman being paranoid or something. In this particular situation, what these elders do is they take the most attractive Spartan women and they basically imprison them and sort of use them. It's implied for sexual delight, although female sexuality in certain times was also known to be very spiritual, is known to being a connection to a higher power. So these men, they were these like really, like they didn't look very good, and they described them as being really disgusting. Basically, we're like imprisoning these women to like use their sexual energy in order to reach a higher spiritual power.
Choose only the most beautiful Spartan girls to live among them as oracles. Their beauty is their curse, but the old wretches have the needs of men, and souls as black as hell.
It's creepy, right? I mean, it is. They ask the oracle, and the oracle basically says no, that Sparta can't go to war. So then when you have Leonidas and his queen who actually connect in the bedroom, and they have this really, really amazing scene that I think just sums up masculine and feminine relationships so perfectly. The masculine is in his head. As the queen points out, he's seeming very distant, and he starts trying to connect to her sexually, which is very actually common when a man needs to get out of his head. One of the best ways he can do that is actually through sexual interaction, which is one of the reasons why men use that as kind of a go-to when they want to get out of their head, because that's the best way for most men to get out of their head, is to involve in some kind of physical experience, ideally with a feminine woman. So it's interesting in that conversation when the queen asks him if what's bothering him is the oracle, and the queen actually asks him why he's being distant or hesitant with her, like has he lost his desire for her? She's being playful, and he basically says it would take a lot more than a drunken adolescent girl to rob my desire for you. So
has the oracle robbed you of your desire as well?
It would take more than the words of a drunken adolescent girl to rob me of my desire for you.
And I actually think that that's a big misconception that we have about masculinity, is that masculine men have this sort of like harem of women. And if you think about it, it's actually these sort of like these weaker elder men who basically have sort of captured these young women to sort of basically use them for their sexual power. Because these men are basically looking to use women for their sexual power, whereas when you have a true masculine king-like energy, he's not just swayed by any young attractive woman. He knows the value of having a queen beside him. And I think that's a really important note, that a masculine man is not the man who's just running around with any young girl so he can basically use her for her sexual energy. The true masculine man is a man who loves and appreciates his feminine queen. And if you notice, he actually doesn't need to imprison these young girls in order to get this oracle energy. His queen is his oracle. I think that's a really key piece that we don't talk about enough in our society, is how valuable a feminine woman is to a masculine partner. She brings feminine gifts to the table, and one of that is being the oracle, is being tuned into her body. And one of the reasons why Leonidas uses the queen as an oracle several times in this film is because their hearts are connected. And when a masculine partner connects to a feminine partner's heart, and they have this deep heart connection, he can actually use her intuition as his own, and he does in many points in this film. Actually, earlier on in the film, when the messenger comes and the king is trying to decide how to handle the situation with the messenger, who's basically asking him to surrender, he looks to his queen and she gives her intuition. She gives him the nod, and she gives him, not giving him permission, so to speak.
You bring the crowns and heads of conquered kings to my city steps. You insult my queen. You threaten my people with slavery and death. Oh, I've chosen my words carefully, Persian. perhaps you should have done the same.
This is blasphemy. This is madness.
Madness. This is Sparta!
Of being the oracle, of being the wisdom of the heart. The masculine is of the mind and the feminine is of the heart. And together, as a couple, as the king energy and the queen energy, they can come together and they're stronger together. And then when they're in the bedroom and they're connecting, and he basically says to his queen, you know, that he's struggling with what to do. And she basically guides him. She's not telling him what to do, but she's using her inner wisdom, the wisdom of her heart, to share with him the wisdom that she knows he knows. Like, he knows this. It's just she's sharing her inner wisdom with him because she's the oracle. She's the heart of their relationship and he's the mind. And when he's stuck in his mind, she can offer her heart and her heart wisdom to him as a gift.
What must the king do to save his world when the very laws he is sworn to protect force him to do nothing?
It is not a question of what a Spartan citizen should do, nor a husband, nor a king. Instead, ask yourself, my dearest love, what should a free man do?
And then they have this pretty steamy sex scene, which I actually think is really symbolic. You see their connection. I think it's very much evident that when you have a deeper sexual connection with somebody, and this actually could go into a whole other discussion that I'm not going to get into too deeply in this video because that could be a whole video in itself, but there's the concept of sexual energy, specifically a masculine being connecting with the sexual energy of a feminine being can be very enlivening if it is deep sex. Actually, one of my mentors, Kim Anami, actually uses the term gourmet sex, right? The quick sexual release that many people experience, she refers to as junk food sex, right? Particularly for a masculine partner. It's similar for a feminine partner, but in this case, I'm talking about a masculine partner. Those kind of like quick, like one night stands with a quick release, or even just when you're with yourself or with a partner and it's really just kind of a quick release of energy that actually depletes your life force energy. Whereas many people believe that actually having like deep connected intimacy, like true sexual intimacy with a partner, for both partners, but in this particular case, speaking of the masculine, it actually enlivens him, it increases his life force energy. And that's actually one of the reasons people believe that, you know, it's that deep intimacy, that deep sexual intimacy with a partner makes men stronger in their warrior energy. They're more able to go out into the world to either go to war or maybe just go to their own personal war with the world. And it's that deep intimacy with a feminine partner that allows the masculine to strengthen his life force energy to go out into the world and take on whatever battle he needs to battle, whether it be, you know, on the battleground or whether it be in the boardroom or wherever it is. And that having these quick little flings or just like expelling that sexual energy, you know, wherever or however, actually depletes a man's life force energy. And I think that's evident if you think about it. The strongest, most masculine man in this movie is the one that's having that deep, intimate, connected sex with a true queen. Leonidas and his team of 300 Spartan men who basically all go off on this journey to fight this battle together. They're all such an embodiment of masculinity. Healthy masculinity, which I don't think we see often enough. If you think about it, they understand that there's a nobility in the battle, even if it's a battle to the death. They're true hunters. They have a passion and purpose. They're often the underdogs, but they have such a strategy and a plan, and because they work together as a unit so well, that they can defeat armies that are so much bigger than them because they don't have as much of a plan. They're more erratic. They don't have that structure. I'm not really big into battle scenes, but I gotta say, like, the precision with which the Spartan army moves is true masculine energy. When you look at it up against some of the other armies that they're battling, who are just kind of all over the place and erratic, they don't really have a plan. But I have a whole video about the masculine archetypes, but I gotta say, in particular in this film, there's a lot of warrior energy, and like healthy warrior energy of men who are not fighting from their ego. They're not fighting from a place of needing to prove that they're better. They're fighting for a way of life. It's interesting, actually, in one of the scenes, I believe it's when Leonidas is talking to the elders, and it's interesting how he refers to Sparta as a she, which I think is really interesting because he has this drive to protect. So he thinks of his entire people, of his land, as a she, because that's what drives him to protect it. It's, you know, it's that protector energy of needing to protect the feminine. It's also, you notice at one point where he argues that he needs to do this because if the land gets taken over, that the women and children will become slaves. Like, he's doing this to fight for the women and children, right? Like, the men are men who are there to fight. They're there to protect, and he understands that, whereas they're fighting to protect the lives and the livelihood of the women and children. You get the impression that in Sparta, women and children are revered higher than they are in other places. And you can see there's a real drive from the masculine to protect those rights. There's actually a lot of talk in this film about freedom, and freedom is actually one of the biggest masculine drives. The masculine always longs for freedom, and the feminine always longs for love. That often drives the masculine and the feminine to do things they're not necessarily healthy, like the masculine to run away from good relationships because he wants freedom, the feminine to stay in bad relationships because she wants love. Like, it's very often a push-pull, and that's in a very wounded form. However, when in both cases, when the masculine realizes that he is freedom, he truly is the freedom that he seeks, and when the feminine realizes that she is really the love that she seeks, that's usually when they find their most fulfillment. And I think that the symbolism of this, in this, the freedom and the fighting for freedom in the masculine, really does show the masculine drive.
No retreat, no surrender. That is Spartan law. And by Spartan law, we will stand and fight and die. A new age has begun. An age of freedom. And all will know that 300 Spartans gave their last breath to defend it.
So then you meet Xerxes, who is a, is he a god? Is he a king? Well, he actually thinks he's both, right? I would actually say Xerxes is really symbolic of what I would call toxic masculinity. I know people don't like that term. To me, that's what that would mean, right? Like, he's your typical, like, I don't like the way that they've taken the word alpha male, but like the way that we've taken this sort of false masculinity that's not really masculinity, but it's this sort of toxic, unhealthy behavior in the false name of masculine, right? So it's interesting with Xerxes. Xerxes is a really big combination of, I would say, wounded masculine energy and wounded feminine energy, which you can have both. Many people do have a combination of both, but he's a pretty severe case of both of those. Wounded masculine energy is usually a desire to hurt people, to control people through manipulation, you know, and really just to feed your own ego, like not for a greater purpose other than for yourself, to make yourself feel more important, more superior. And wounded feminine energy can often be, I mean, it's often related to self-harm, but it can very often be related to self-harm through massive addictions or this sort of overuse of pleasure to the point where it's destructive. Because if you think about it, in this sort of like manly way that he's trying to present himself as this like sort of godlike king and this powerful person, he has a slightly feminine way about him. Not a pretty feminine, but like again, like this overindulgence in pleasure, not having self-control, that kind of thing, which is very wounded feminine. I'm gonna go out on a limb here, and I've heard this alluded to in several different places, but I don't hear people talk about this much, and this is just something that's coming through for me. This may not feel true for everybody, but it's just something that I'm noticing, is when people get into very wounded masculine and very wounded feminine energy. So you have both in one person, both of those energies, and we all have, most of us have some level of wounding in those energies to a certain extent that, you know, we need to work on and heal. But when you get into really extreme cases of both the wounded masculine and the wounded feminine together in one person, I think that's when you start to get people with narcissistic personality disorder, sociopaths, psychopaths. Like, I think that that's where that stems from. It's a theory that I'm working on. I don't have any actual scientific background in this area, so, but it's just something that I'm feeling into from my own personal experience and things that I've observed. But I don't really think it's that far-fetched to say that Xerxes is clearly a narcissist. He's actually a psychopath, right? But it's interesting the dynamics between him and Leonidas, because I think they really show the drastic difference between healthy and unhealthy masculine energy. And it's interesting in that initial conversation, Xerxes alludes to the fact that, you know, he would be willing to kill any of his people to get what he wants. And Leonidas says, interesting, because I'd be willing to die for any of mine.
The presence of a god. It isn't wise to stand against me, Leonidas. Imagine what horrible fate awaits my enemies when I would gladly kill any of my own men for victory.
And I would die for any one of mine.
It's that masculine drive to protect versus that masculine drive to control and manipulate, right? I mean, that's like healthy, unhealthy masculine energy right there in that dynamic. And it's an extreme version of it, but I think that that really brings it to the surface of, like, that's really what it comes down to. Like, is your urge to fight, is it from an ego place of wanting to control and manipulate people to get what you want, or is it from a place of trying to protect the people that you love, or just society or people in general? And also when you see Xerxes' lair and his like harem of women who are all basically these very like sexualized women, and like he lives in this den of like having these women as like his sex slaves, so to speak. I think it's very similar to like what you see now with these men who have this perceived high value because they have some kind of level of power or money or success, and that they have all these women, or all this harem of women, or these, you know, whatever, these women that they have in their roster, so to speak. It's just to feed their ego. It doesn't have anything to do with true love or true intimacy, which is what Leonidas has, which is why he can step so much into his masculine, why he really is more successful in life. I mean, in the long run, he's somebody who's respected. He has people who are willing to risk their lives for him because they respect him so much. Whereas you have this other person who is in power, but people are only following him or doing things for him out of fear, out of manipulation. They're not doing things for him or because they actually believe in what he's fighting for. They're really just followers. And I don't like to get political in any of these videos, so I'm not going to, but I do just want to say that I do think there's a lot of parallels to some of the things that are going on today, as far as the people who are manipulating people into thinking that they're the good guys and when they're not really the good guys. And it's really interesting when Xerxes has a speech where he talks about how he won't expect you to stand. Like, he doesn't expect you to be a strong man. He doesn't expect you to stand up straight. He just asks you to kneel.
I am kind. Unlike the cruel Leonidas, who demanded that you stand. I require only that you kneel.
Which I think is really symbolic of one in particular mentality that we have right now in our society, of like, oh, I'm not going to expect you to be the best version of yourself. I'm just going to ask you to kneel down and worship me. And I think that that's really important, and I'm not going to go pointing fingers or naming names, but yeah. Those of you that are awake to it are awake to it. Those of you that aren't, all I'm going to say. You also notice in the final battle scene, Leonidas is he's basically sacrificing himself. He's sacrificing himself for his country. And it's interesting how in that scene, he basically attacks Xerxes, and Xerxes literally just gets like a scratch on his face. Like it's just a scratch on the face, and he acts as if it's the worst thing that's ever happened to him, like, oh my god. Meanwhile, Leonidas is getting basically just like riddled with arrows and just like basically is being killed. And if you notice, it shows the different levels of strength. It's like, oh my goodness, my face got scarred, because he's not really a king, he's not really a warrior, he's not really embodying his masculine energy. He's really just this egomaniac. Whereas you have this truly masculine warrior who's like, I'm willing to lay down my life for what I believe in. And I think think that that's really important. And then of course there's the scene when you have the soldiers, and one of the soldiers says to the king as they're dying, like, it was an honor to die with you, and you know, the king is like, it was an honor to have lived with you. And I just think that's just a beautiful moment of like this sort of life and death dynamic.
It's an honor to die at your side.
It's an honor to have lived at yours.
And also the fact that Leonidas, when he's dying, he actually screams out to his queen, his wife, and his love. I can get emotional just thinking about that. It's this, you know, she is that to him. She's queen. She is wife and mother, and she is his heart, his love.
My queen!
And that she's coming with him because she is his heart. There's so much in this that shows healthy masculinity versus unhealthy masculinity. And I really think it's super important in our society that we really make that distinction, because I think too many people, I have another video where I talk about this, is that too many people either think that all masculine energy, all men, everything is bad, or they go to the other extreme of, no, men can do no wrong, masculinity is perfect, you know, men are you know, these godlike creatures and they can do whatever they want, and neither one of those mentalities is healthy. And I think this gives an example of the healthy version and the unhealthy version. I think, you know, obviously for men, if there are any men watching and you've learned something from this, great. But I really want women especially to see the difference so you know what to look for in a man. Now obviously Gerard Butler's probably not going to show up at your house in like a Spartan uniform, and wouldn't that be nice if he did? But what I'm saying is that these extreme versions, like when you see these extreme versions, like what is his urge to fight someone? Like, is his urge because it comes from a healthy place or because it's from an unhealthy place? Is he living in his ego? Is he somebody who's just basically using a lot of women to just get little hits of you know, sexual energy from, or is he actually interested in like deep sexual intimacy, right? It's noticing those things so you know what to look for and what to look out for, really. And because I love talking about femininity and queen energy, I want to talk about Queen Gorgo, because it's interesting with her, like, she's not what you would typically think of as a feminine woman, because she doesn't really embody the sort of typical girly energy that you would see in the average, like the stereotypical feminine energy. And don't get me wrong, I love the girly energy. Obviously, if you've been following me at all, you know I love the girly feminine energy. I really do. And you can embody all the archetypes of the feminine in a very girly way. I actually have my Elle Woods breakdown, which shows how you can do that. She's the ultimate girly girl. Queen Gorgo represents so many of the feminine archetypes in a different way, which I think is really great, because it's a reminder that femininity doesn't have to look a certain way. It doesn't have to, you doesn't have to wear pink. I just realized I'm wearing pink as I say that, but it doesn't have to look a certain way. It can look a various way, but if you notice with Queen Gorgo, she, as strong as she is and is embodied in her huntress energy, which is like the feminine equivalent of the warrior energy, as embodied as she is in that, she has a softness. She has a mothering energy. It's interesting how in the beginning when she speaks up to the messenger, and the messenger basically is like, you know, what right does this woman think that she has to speak to a man? And she's like, well, because only Spartan women give birth to Spartan men.
What makes this woman think she can speak among men?
Because only Spartan women give birth to real men.
It's that knowing her worth, for one, which is very queen-like. She's tapped into that lover oracle energy, which you see when she's with the king in their bedroom.
There's only one woman's words that should affect the mood of my husband. Those are mine.
She's a very mothering energy when she speaks to the council, when she gives her speech. If you notice in her speech to the council, she is actually really good at honoring her husband, but not speaking for him. Like she says, she lets her husband's actions speak for themselves.
I'm not here to represent Leonidas. His actions speak louder than my words ever could. I am here for all those voices which cannot be heard. Mothers, daughters, fathers, sons. 300 families that bleed for our rights and for the very principles this room was built upon. We are at war, gentlemen. We must send the entire Spartan army to aid our king in the preservation of not just ourselves, but of our children. Send the army for the preservation of liberty. Send it for justice. Send it for law and order. Send it for reason. But most importantly, send our army for hope. Hope that a king and his men have not been wasted to the pages of history. That their courage bonds us together. That we are made stronger by their actions. And that your choices today reflect their bravery.
She's speaking as a queen. It's a very queen-like energy. It also embodies a lot of mother energy and a lot of warrior energy, because this at this point in time was not something that was really common for women to do, is to speak to a room full of men like this. It's a very queen-like energy. You notice she's not downing the men, she's not overpowering the men, she has a softness in her strength, which I think is really impressive. And when she decides she needs to grab a sword and stand up for herself, boy, she's in some pretty huntress energy right there. I would say also too that she, as much as she's not a maiden, she's clearly a strong woman who is probably released a lot of her maiden energy. She does let herself get taken advantage of, which is really a sacrifice for her husband, but she's trying to sway one of the council members, who's, we find out later, is a traitor, into voting to send her husband support. And he basically is like, well, I'll do it if you let me do you, you know, that kind of thing. You notice in that scene, and that scene may be triggering for some people, there's nothing graphic, but just the energy around it. He's also an example of a very unhealthy masculine energy, right? Because he's trying to take advantage of a woman, but he's not going to get any sexual energy out of that. He's not. It's going to deplete him, and which, you know, is probably why. If you notice the one man in this film that is really getting some good lovin' is the most masculine man in this film. And all this unhealthy masculine energy that is sort of in the false name of masculine energy, they might be getting more sexual energy, they're getting more women, they're getting more of a variety of women. It's not making them more masculine. It's actually making them all traitors, corrupt. In some cases, they're these sort of withered beings on a mountain, or some cases they're these egomaniac gods. And yeah, they get what they want, but like, is anybody really happy? You know what I mean? Like, they're basically just controlling and manipulating people. And they're not really getting love, they're not really getting intimacy, they're not getting stronger through these sexual encounters. Their ego is getting stronger, but like, they're not really getting satisfied truly, and they're not really stepping into the best version of themselves. I really enjoyed this movie more than I thought I was going to, and like, I loved seeing like this queen energy in the queen. I mean, I love looking at the masculine warriors. I mean, obviously that's a benefit of watching the film for sure. Yeah, I loved seeing the different dynamics between the healthy masculine and the unhealthy masculine, and also this real like king queen energy in this movie. I actually think there were some really great examples. So after you watch this video, I highly suggest you watch this movie and see if you can pick out some of the things that I mentioned. And I will actually have some clips of this on TikTok that you'll be able to check out if you want to see some quick little breakdowns. All that information will be in the description box below. If you've seen this movie, or after you watch this movie, I want to hear your thoughts, so leave them in the comment section below. I'd love to hear from you. If you have any suggestions for film breakdowns, let me know. I love to hear those as well. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please give it a big thumbs up, and be sure you subscribe to my channel. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you join me next time.